Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I'm one of the co-founders here at ETR. And as I do each and every week, I am joined by the legend himself, fellow ETR co-founder, Evan Silva. Evan, what's going on, buddy?
What's going on, man? Today we're going to be talking about some season-long hits and misses looking back on the year of 2019.
Yeah, and as I mentioned in the last episode, I do think there's significant value in looking back now that we're here in February, the season's behind us, looking back, seeing what we got right, what we got wrong, and more importantly, why, and anything that we can learn from that going forward. In the meantime, please go to EstablishTheRun.com. Check out what we have going there. We have free content up about free agency by Evan. We have XFL stuff, which our XFL team, has been putting a ton of time and effort into. We'll have depth charts. We have the show on Thursday night. And we have our top plays and tiers. So go ahead and check that out. But what we want to do today, again, we're going to look at guys that went roughly in the, or we had in the 7th round or later, and see what went right and what went wrong. And I want to start with 67th overall in Evan's final top 150 was Patrick Mahomes. And it was very controversial, or maybe not very controversial, but it opened a lot of people's eyes that Evan did not have Patrick Mahomes as the QB1. Evan had Deshaun Watson as the QB1. And I think, I think most sharp people understood that Mahomes' 3rd round ADP was like absurd, right? It was publicly driven by people who don't understand like the relative value of quarterbacks in one quarterback fantasy leagues. But even sharp people didn't have Deshaun Watson as the QB1, or they almost all had Patrick Mahomes as the QB1. In terms of finish of fantasy points per game, it was Lamar Jackson 1st, Deshaun Watson 2nd, Dak Prescott 3rd, Matthew Stafford 4th, Russ Wilson 5th, and then Patrick Mahomes all the way down at 6th. Now, I think in fairness to Mahomes, people will say, hey, he dislocated his knee. Tyreek was hurt for a bit. But to me, that's all part of regression, right? Like in 2018, he got the nut game scripts for stats. He got perfect health. That's all part of the variance that comes with having this massive outlier season. That's all in the game. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, looking back, I think Patrick Mahomes was ripe for regression. I still would have had him as the quarterback 1, but as you can see, he can fall down to quarterback 6, and it's all so close at quarterback. But let's talk about Patrick Mahomes' 2019 season, Evan, and his outlook going forward. And we can bake the playoffs into this because he was certainly awesome in the playoffs. So what do you think about Patrick Mahomes 2019 and going forward?
Yeah, I mean, injuries are definitely a part of regression, especially in the violent sport that we cover. Patrick Mahomes was healthy in 2018. He got banged up in 2019. Deshaun Watson was banged up in 2018, and he was healthy in 2019. Okay, so regression went both ways. Patrick Mahomes' touchdown rate dropped from 8.6% in 2018 to 5.4% in 2019. Mm-hmm. So, and that, that's a really normal drop. 5.4%, by the way, is still a killer touchdown rate. But, that's right exactly how we really should have expected it to go. This guy is not going to be throwing, 9% of his pass attempts for touchdowns for the rest of his career. And I think that we could see him move back up like into the 6% range, or like 6.5% in 2020. But yeah, I mean, this was just a purely, regression-based projection, and it worked out for the readers and the subscribers.
I thought one factor was Kansas City's defense played better, and a lot of that was opponent-driven. But over the last 6-7 games or so, I mean, the defense played well, and Mahomes wasn't needed for 40 attempts. He wasn't needed to throw 4 touchdown passes. And that's all in the game also. That's all in the variance also. In 2018, Mahomes was involved in so many of these wild shootouts where the defense just couldn't get off the field, and led to these huge plays and huge game scripts for Mahomes. So it's all part of it. Okay, let's move to one where we were wrong. And I was really excited about Curtis Samuel. I was on the Curtis Samuel hype train. A lot of other people were as well, which drove his ADP from 12th round to at one point he was going in the 7th round or so. I will say that maybe it was different if Cam Newton stays healthy, right? Because Curtis Samuel had an unreal amount of air yards. He was 9th in the entire league in air yards. Kyle Allen could not hit him deep to save his life. And maybe a lot of that's on Kyle Allen. Maybe Curtis Samuel isn't as good as we thought in terms of catching deep balls, in terms of winning at the catch point deep down the field. So I'm really curious what your take is on Curtis Samuel, because it's super interesting. How much do you think of Curtis Samuel's disappointing season was quarterback play? How much of it do you think was Curtis Samuel maybe isn't as good as we thought he was?
No, I think vast majority is quarterback play and the way that he was used, because he really wound up being stuck to the sideline while DJ Moore and Greg Olson were, the high volume, high percentage guys running routes over the middle, and Christian McCaffrey, of course. So Curtis Samuel just played the lowest percentage position on the field among the Panthers skill position players, with a quarterback in Kyle Allen that couldn't stretch the field. So, I mean, that's the tale of his season. There were some promising takeaways from his season. I mean, he scored 7 touchdowns. He scored 7 touchdowns in back-to-back years now. He's still really young. I mean, that was his age 23 season. He's going to be 24 and in his 4th season, entering his 4th season. He came out of Ohio State as a redshirt sophomore. He was really, really young. He had 19 rushing attempts for 130 yards and a touchdown. You remember at Ohio State, he played quite a bit of running back. And so I'd just like to see him involved more in the running game. That's a kind of a low-key way that guys like Robert Woods and, Cooper Kupp and, Tyreek Hill, that they can accumulate production that isn't necessarily just directly in the receiving column. Curtis Samuel's still getting better, man. And, he stayed healthy. He battled injuries in his first 2 seasons. And his production, the arrow is pointing up. It's just he did not take that monster leap that I think a lot of us were hoping that he would, and that he might have taken it if Cam Newton had stayed healthy.
Sure, and I really hope we get to see Cam Newton back on the field and healthy this year. We'll see on that. Another one where I was dead wrong on kind of this 8th, 9th round range for wide receiver was Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And, I think a lot of this stems from Aaron Rodgers and maybe overestimating where Aaron Rodgers is, right? Like, I assume that Aaron Rodgers can and will support multiple wide receivers. The bottom line is that when this team gets close to the end zone, over the last couple of years, they're extremely run heavy. I mean, look at Aaron Jones' usage around the goal line. And then Davante Adams is just like the only one in Aaron Rodgers' trust tree. Aaron Rodgers has only thrown not that many touchdown passes, 51 touchdown passes over the last 2 seasons, 18 of them to Davante Adams. So in hindsight, I think, well, first of all, Marquez Valdes-Scantling fell behind Geronimo Allison, fell behind Allen Lazard. Like, Marquez Valdes-Scantling had a disappointing season. But on top of that, I think a takeaway is overestimating how many wide receivers Aaron Rodgers can support at this point in his career. How do you feel about that take with Aaron Rodgers? I know it's a controversial thing to say that Aaron Rodgers is on the downside.
No, I would completely agree with that. I would completely agree with that. At the same time, he didn't really have very good talent beyond Davante Adams. That's why down the stretch, especially, Davante Adams was such a lock in DFS. I mean, you could count on him, even into the playoffs. He was an absolute monster, because he really wasn't competing with anybody for targets. So, but I think that it's fair to question, just how good is Marquez Valdes-Scantling? What's his future like going to be, in the league? Because he fell behind some guys that, are not very good. I mean, he fell behind Allen Lazard, and, he was like sharing time with Jake Kumaro late in the year. So, I don't know. I mean, there was a lot of hype on him. Aaron Rodgers himself was really high on Marquez Valdes-Scantling, but it just never came together for him, and he lost a bunch of playing time down the stretch. And at this point, he's just like, a guy at the back end of your dynasty roster.
Yeah. It seems like he would need a change of scenery for me to get excited about MVS again. Speaking of guys that were disappointing, this Dante Pettis situation, and it's hard to tell in the preseason sometimes what's coach speak and what's not. I thought there was a reasonable enough chance with Dante Pettis that the way Kyle Shanahan was talking in the preseason, that the way he was using the preseason, not running hardly any snaps with the first teamers, was enough of a warning flag that we should be off Dante Pettis. And I liked Dante Pettis' talent, but I thought it was scary enough. And then, of course, it comes to fruition that Dante Pettis was just total dust. Like, I don't know what he did, but Kyle Shanahan and the coaching staff just absolutely hated Dante Pettis. Do you have any regrets looking back about the Dante Pettis situation, and how can people separate some of this coach speak, like we talked about with Christian McCaffrey in the last episode, fake versus the real coach speak that happened to happen with Dante Pettis?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to have too many regrets about guys that are like ninth, 10th, 11th round fantasy picks, because you
Yep.
just end up dropping them and move on. But yeah, I mean, I wish that I would have been lower on it. There were beat writers that were saying that they thought that, Dante Pettis running with the twos and the threes was a motivational tactic. That it wasn't necessarily that he had been benched. It was that, that Kyle Shanahan was trying to use that to motivate him, and that he was still the 49ers number one receiver. Um, but that, none of that. I mean, Dante Pettis finished the 2018 season really, really strong, albeit in a small sample size. So I think that the takeaway here is probably not to not get too caught up in the sample size. And it's another testament to paying attention to what happens in the preseason and training camp. I know that there's like this push in some fantasy circles where they tell you not to pay attention in the preseason training camp. Like, what a way to fall behind. And I mean, what disastrous advice that is. But I mean, hey, I should have paid, this is a situation where I should have paid more attention to what was going on with Dante Pettis, and not listening to the beat writers that were saying that it was a motivational tactic.
Yeah. Yeah. Really strange situation for Dante Pettis. Maybe there's more of the story that we still don't know. Speaking of flyers that you got right, you had Courtland Sutton 86th overall in the top 150. Courtland Sutton's ADP was 122. And I was a little bit scared on Courtland Sutton because his rookie year was frustrating when he got opportunities. The quarterback situation with Joe Flacco and Drew Lock I thought wasn't great. Manny Sanders was there. I preferred Deshaun Hamilton, which turned out to be just an egregious error. But in terms of just bet on talent, I mean, if you just want to say, hey, I'm just going to bet on talent, Courtland Sutton would have been the pick here. And I think that's at least one takeaway to have in this kind of flyer range where you can get Courtland Sutton in the, 12th, 13th round or wherever he went. And you can reach up to the 10th and not risk a lot and just bet on a guy's talent, even despite the situation. So what were you thinking about the Courtland Sutton having him 86th overall at the time? And what do you think about Courtland Sutton going forward?
Yeah, I was betting against Manny Sanders.
Yeah.
And then he wound up getting traded. So, and that didn't hurt Courtland Sutton. I remember, Courtland Sutton had just been playing really well, like playing really good football. And then all of a sudden they traded Emmanuel Sanders, and people were like, oh, now Courtland Sutton's going to get double teamed. No, that's not how this works. He's going to get more volume. And that's what he did. And he capitalized on it. He showed a lot of rapport with Drew Lock, albeit again, in a small sample size. But I mean, I just think he's a really good player. He took a big second year leap. I think he's just going to get better. I think he's like a prototypical number one receiver. I know Chris Wessling, our old pal at Roto World, now at NFL Network, he thought that Courtland Sutton deserved a spot on the All-Pro team. And I don't disagree with him at all for the AFC. Courtland Sutton had that good of a year. He, in addition to, being really strong statistically, he drew more pass interference penalties than any other receiver in the league. I know he was in the double digits. I know he had at least 10 of them. And like he worked Casey Hayward of the Chargers. I mean, he was outstanding, and he is a real big time asset in Dynasty.
Yeah. Let's talk about another kind of deep dynasty guy, and that's Justice Hill. And there were a lot of these running backs who I think people got really high on in the draft process. Tony Pollard comes to mind. Darrell Henderson comes to mind. A lot of these rookie backs, even Miles Sanders, who we were really high on. The Eagles didn't give Miles Sanders a chance really until late in the year. And then he was a huge asset, but they didn't really give him a chance till late in the year. And Justice Hill really never got a chance. Gus Edwards was Mark Ingram's direct backup. Justice Hill finished the whole year with just 58 carries and 8 catches despite dressing for all 16 games. So I don't know if you think there's a larger takeaway here on some of these like late round running backs who are projected in backup roles, or if you think it was just kind of an outlier with Justice and Tony Pollard and Darrell Henderson and maybe Miles Sanders even being overdrafted.
No, I don't think. I mean, I think that those are the kind of guys that you take shots on late in the draft, and sometimes they work out and sometimes they don't, and that's just that's just the way it is. They're dart throws. You draft them in the double digit rounds for a reason. They're available there in the reason for a reason. But that's why you take them, because they've got some upside and they've got a lot of downside. And Darwin Thompson and Tony Pollard and Justice Hill and these guys, they didn't help you.
Yeah, there was a time I know it was contract related, but there was a time Tony Pollard was going like the 9th round. It was so funny, and people thought that Tony Pollard was going to have a role even after Ezekiel Elliott reported, which was always a really shaky leg to stand on.
He should have, though. He should have.
Well, yes, certainly should have. Speaking of Dallas, I want to talk about Michael Gallup because, man, I mean, in terms of guys who took a leap forward in 2019, Michael Gallup looked like just an absolute baller out there, and his role down the stretch, and it was probably due to some injury that we weren't aware of Amari Cooper, but Michael Gallup looked like the best wide receiver, the number one receiver very late in the year for the Dallas Cowboys. Again, similar to Amari, I think the improved play of Dak Prescott certainly helped Michael Gallup, but yeah, I mean, Michael Gallup was legit. His ADP was around 130. You had him 102 in the top 150. Where do you come down on Michael Gallup, and what did you see in him coming into the 2019 season?
Yeah, this is another testament to paying attention to training camp reports, because the training camp reports on Michael Gallup were just glowing. The Cowboys are a very well-covered team. They've got a lot of beat writers, and there was a consensus among the beat writers that Gallup was really, really showing well on the practice field in training camp. And he finished the 2018 season pretty strong. I believe he had 100 yards against the Rams in the playoffs. We knew he was good, but we didn't necessarily know he was that good to where, now we're at a point where he might be the Cowboys' number one receiver in 2020 if they can't figure out a way to re-sign Amari Cooper. But yeah, I mean, he was outstanding in his second season. The arrows continuing to point up for him.
Yeah. I'm like a total dynasty donkey. I play like hardly any dynasty, but Evan and I are in this one Roto World league that's run by Roto Pat. It's the only dynasty league that I play in, and every year I just do the same thing. I try to hang on to my first round pick at all costs, and I just try to take the best wide receiver available. And like a couple years ago, just having Michael Gallup, I hardly knew anything about him. I was just like, whatever, I'll take Michael Gallup. He's a wide receiver. He's in the first round, and turns out that hopefully struck gold there. Okay, I want to talk about Lamar Jackson. There were people, I think, higher than me and you on Lamar Jackson, but we were certainly higher than market on Lamar Jackson. You had him as the QB9. His ADP finished out around QB12. Lamar Jackson, the floor was always going to be really high because of his rushing ability. I think the question was, could he throw it well enough to find an upside to the point where he could actually be the QB1? Obviously, he did. Evan mentioned TD rate when we talked about Patrick Mahomes. Lamar Jackson's TD rate in 2019 was actually higher than Patrick Mahomes' outrageous TD rate in 2018. I mean, Lamar Jackson, a full 9.0% of his passes went for touchdowns. Just absurd, right? And you thought that, everybody thought that Ryan Tannehill's touchdown rate was wild at 7.7%. I mean, Ryan Tannehill was second at 7.7%. Lamar Jackson, 9%. So just totally absurd with his arm. And I think Lamar Jackson took a bigger step forward throwing than I thought that he would, but still think that 9% is just absolutely ridiculously unsustainable. What is sustainable is his rushing. So I don't think that you're going to see as big of a regression on Lamar Jackson as you could have projected with Patrick Mahomes. But yeah, I think Lamar Jackson's a really interesting case, Evan, one of the most unique players that we've seen in fantasy. And I don't know where he's going to go in 2020 drafts. I would assume that most people would take him in the first round if they had the chance to right now. But where are you at with Lamar Jackson?
What was particularly impressive about him leading the NFL in touchdown passes was that he did it with guys like Willie Snead and Nick Boyle. And I mean, Mark Andrews is awesome, but Mark Andrews is banged up for a lot of the season, was not a full-time player. He was like a rotational player. Marquise Brown had the one big week one and then didn't do a whole lot until the playoffs. And, he was hurt. So that was really, really impressive. He threw a bunch of touchdown passes to Mark Ingram and stuff. I mean, the thing is that his receiver core has a lot of room to improve, and I think that the Ravens will invest in his receiver core and put better weapons around him. He's still going to regress off that 9% touchdown rate. I mean, that's an absurd number. But, I don't think that I'm not sure we've seen the best of Lamar Jackson. There still seems to be a big camp that thinks that, this guy is going to get figured out or whatever. They just, they can't they're so stuck on how the NFL was for so long, being run by quarterbacks that are drop back passers. And they can't understand that, now the NFL, you need to be a movement quarterback. You need to be able to move the pass rushers they're too fast. You have to be able to move, and the league is being taken over by guys like Lamar Jackson and Deshaun Watson, and even Patrick Mahomes is an excellent athlete. Even Josh Allen. That's the reason that he has had the level of success that he has had. It's not because he's some great passer.
Okay, I want to get to one that I actually do have regrets on, and I know it's hard to have regrets on a guy that you took in like the last round or whatever, but Chris Herndon tied up a roster spot for us for, what was it, the first 4 weeks or 5 weeks or something like that. And yeah, it's easy to say, I took a guy in the 13th round, he sucked, and I just dropped him. But you couldn't do that with Chris Herndon, because the whole point of it was you're going to hold Chris Herndon until he comes in off suspension, has a big year. Of course, in like his first practice back from suspension, he pulls his hamstring, ends up playing in just one game all year. Adam Gase is a total disaster, and I'm not sure Chris Herndon even would have had been productive for us even if he had gotten on the field, I guess is my point. So, I think you have to be very, very careful with guys who you draft who are on suspension. Kareem Hunt, too, tied up a roster spot for a lot of people for a long time and didn't give us much for all that. So a lot depends on the size of your bench, et cetera, et cetera. But, in most situations, it's probably not right to take these fringe guys that are suspended. And I think that's a good lesson to learn from Chris Herndon. Any thoughts there on what happened with Chris Herndon?
Just total goose egg there, man. I mean, even in the one game you played, you couldn't play him because you were uncertain of his health. So I think he's going to be an awesome bounce back pick for 2020, though. It didn't work. Our plan did not work. I mean, it was specific to big bench leagues. I mean, you couldn't do this in some league where you have 5 bench spots or something. And by the way, people, more bench spots, at least 6 bench spots, please. But you couldn't do it in a short bench league anyways.
One of the kind of late tight end strategies along with Chris Herndon was to get Darren Waller also, because Darren Waller was like free, man. I mean, Darren Waller was not even being drafted in a lot of leagues. And yeah, we were high on Darren Waller. I think that was a big hit because dude had 90 catches, 1,145 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And I think, what Evan talked about with Antonio Brown in the last episode, Derek Carr likes to throw over the middle. Derek Carr likes to throw it short, and that's where Darren Waller and the tight ends are going to eat. You saw Jared Cook have a career year with Derek Carr, and then Darren Waller comes in and just rips off 90 catches. In the middle of the year, they signed him to a 3-year, $27 million contract extension. So yeah, I think Darren Waller is very legit, and these are the kind of players, the high upside athletic players who have never done anything before that I like to target in the favorite flyer range. So if you drafted Herndon with Darren Waller, it was a huge win. Basically, if you took any tight end strategy that involved Darren Waller, it was a huge win. Looking back on Darren Waller's 2019 season, Evan, what did you see?
Yeah, just saw a baller. I mean, the dude is really, really good. He can run. He can win in the short and the vertical game. The vertical passing offense is not a big part of any offense that is quarterbacked by Derek Carr. And his ADOT wasn't great, but I mean, you can go watch him play. I mean, he made plays down the football field. He was just wound up being just a perfect match for the way that Derek Carr plays. And he was able to eat up a lot of production.
Yeah, and if you look back at the guys who were hits in the late rounds every year, it's these athletic, talented guys who people are down on for whatever reason. Courtland Sutton, Michael Gallup, we mentioned on here, Darren Waller, and you're gonna have some misses on guys also, for sure. But I think there's always going to be, specifically at the wide receiver position and tight end, there's always going to be guys, just because there's so many of them in the league that are going to have paths through their athleticism and talent to pay off at late round ADPs. All right. That is going to do it for this look back at what we got right and what we got wrong during the 2019 season. Would appreciate if all you guys could go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. It is, of course, free all off season. Check us out on YouTube, Establish and Run YouTube channel, and head to the site for XFL. I thought the league was fun, and it's very, very similar to NFL DFS at this point, except that there's so much less information out there. So we're working really hard to get all the information out there for you guys in terms of injuries, depth charts, usage, etc., etc. You can find all that on establishandrun.com. So for Evan, for Jerry, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.